and we collected and some of the information we're still collecting in order to talk about how we can expand our in-person programming. So with that, I'd say just a couple more words that this is probably the first time in a very, very long time I felt a real sense of optimism. I'm always optimistic, but I feel like it's real optimism this time. We've gotten through the holiday surge, so we had that spike, and now things are starting to taper down. So our numbers are trending down, which is great. We're vaccinating people like crazy throughout the United States. We're averaging 2.1 million a day, which is phenomenal when you think about where we started. And that 92 million doses have been administered thus far, which equates to about 18% of the US population. So we are moving in the right direction very quickly. And I believe in the current administration's promise that by the end of May, anybody who wants to get the vaccination will be able to get it, which means we'll be moving towards that herd immunity goal very quickly. And in that vein, we're definitely thinking in the fall that we're going to be moving to an in-person program, full in-person program. So fingers crossed, everybody. Think positive thoughts, whatever you need to do, just let's keep pushing forward. I also wanted to let everybody know sort of what we're going to go through today. It's going to be our typical agenda. We'll go through a deck that shares a lot of information. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Please make sure in the chat you do, Craig's already told you, but I'll just repeat it. All panelists and attendees, that way everybody sees your message. And we don't have to ask the same question over and over again. Or if you want to ask a more nuanced part to the question, you can certainly enhance a question. We will be recording this, so if someone can hit record, okay, someone's already hit record. If you're uncomfortable being recorded, you can drop off now, and it will be put on our YouTube page, I believe, our YouTube channel. Jen will let everybody know where it's going to pop up when we're ready to go. So I'm going to present a deck. I'm going to pretty much read it to you, which is horrible PowerPoint etiquette, but I want to make sure you get the information that's in there. I'm also going to turn over a few slides to Nyamka so she can sort of field some questions and some thoughts around the academic programming that we're doing. After we're done with the deck, we'll move into our Q&A, and Craig will moderate, so he'll direct the questions to the right people and sort of help us get to the end. And hopefully we'll get through this pretty quickly tonight. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. So hold on here 1 second. All right, can somebody give me a thumbs up if you see? Oh, I got to hit share. Hold on. Damn, multiple screens. All right, are we good? Okay. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned, this is the second of our town halls where we're talking more about reopening efforts and where we are. And you can see by some of these pictures, we have some folks in the building, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Right in the beginning, though, there are a couple slides that have that big red banner at the top that says required. There are some things that we have to make sure everybody in the school has done. As we talked about the last time we had a town hall 2 times ago, and we've been talking about since the fall, we're collecting a lot of data. We analyze that data. Gosh, it must have been last week, more than last week, a week and a half ago. We sent out a survey to our families last Monday, asking you to choose what kind of in-person schedule. We called it the choose a schedule form. That's just trying to gauge the family interest so we know how many families want to come back and under what circumstances they're willing to come back into the building. And we are simultaneously, we're surveying all of our staff and collecting all that information and vaccinations so we can understand how many staff are there. So if you have not done this, and currently, or as of 3 o'clock yesterday, 77 of our students' families have not done this survey yet. And we'll go over the numbers in a little bit. So if you're one of those 77 families, please do it today. We need to hear from everybody. If we don't hear from you in the survey, we're going to be calling folks. The other required one for anybody to come back into the building, any student to come back into the building, you have to meet the same old requirements you would in any school year. That means your child has to be up to date with their vaccinations, and we need to see proof of it. Real quickly, when we did phase 1 and offered seats to a bunch of children, and about 30 plus said, yes, we want to come back. Almost half of them didn't have their vaccinations up to date or didn't have their universal health certificate and could not come back into the building until they got that information. So if you want to come back, get that stuff done now. I know a lot of folks are not going out, they're not going to the doctor, but it's really critical. It's the state law. OSSI will enforce it. We can't allow students back in the building without those things. A little footnote to that though, currently a COVID-19 vaccination is not required for students. In fact, it hasn't been approved for children under the age of 18, unless there's medical conditions and some exceptions. So it's still an emergency approval rate. All three of them are, sorry, not rate, emergency approval, I don't even know what the word would be, emergency approval status. Once it goes public approval and they expand it down to children, then who knows what the city may decide or what the feds may decide. But for now, the COVID-19 vaccination is not required to come back into the building. We want to offer some information like we always try to do, so you have the best and latest information. So here's a click through to our guide to at school learning. So if you opt to come back, this is designed to answer many of your questions, to summarize our health and safety protocols. It summarizes the 110-page plus program or plan we had to write in order to get permission to reopen. It also includes some checklists for you. So it's a good way to prepare for coming back. We have it in both English and Spanish, so please read it at your leisure. And this is the big exciting news. This is the one, my happy slide. Next school year, we are very hopeful that all students and staff can return to the building for in-person learning, if they so opt to. Our vaccination rates are going up. I talked about that a few moments ago. The public health metrics are plateauing and declining generally. So that's great. We've definitely gotten past the holiday surge. People are wearing masks, it's being enforced. But of course, keep in mind, as we've known over this last year, things keep changing. The only constant is change. And so if one of these variants goes crazy or something like that, we may have to change our plans. But right now, for the first time in 11 months and 3 weeks, I'm feeling really optimistic about this. Just want to show some great pictures here of the first week back. You can see the kids are all wearing masks, staff are wearing masks, they're sitting 6 feet apart. There's, believe it or not, there's smiles under those masks. You can kind of see it in their eyes. You can see the children working on the devices over here in the corner. Up here, you see her box of her school supplies. So we'll talk a little bit about how we provide all the supplies the child's going to need to do school in person every day. So I just thought this was a nice slide to sort of set us off on a nice tone. It is a return of joyful noise. From my office, it is the sidewalk that leads out to the playground, and I can hear the kids walking out there during the day, laughing with their teachers. And believe it or not, they're 6 feet apart in a perfect line, but they're doing what they need to do, and they're laughing. So I'm really happy to have them back in the building. So as you may know, Creative Care began March 1st. You probably want to know, how's it going? Is it going well? Were they wrong? It actually turns out it's going very, very well. In fact, what we do almost daily is we meet as a leadership team to talk about our daily reflections and make adjustments as we go. What worked well, what didn't work well, was the bathroom process a good one, et cetera, et cetera. Are we getting kids in the building quickly? All of that kind of stuff. Is recess working? So we're constantly refining it, constantly making it better. But overall, it's gone really, really well. We haven't had many glitches at all. Our students are super excited to be in the building. As I said, there's joyful noise in the classrooms. I try to walk around and peek in them without them seeing me so I don't distract them during the day, and everybody's engaged, they're talking, they're laughing. I think they're happy to see their friends again. Our CMI screening app, which Heather Hesslink and one of her sons developed and is available on the App Store for free, is a great way to make drop-off go quickly. That's one of the big barriers that a lot of schools have seen about getting kids back in the building, is going through the COVID checklist and checking temperatures and all that other kind of stuff. Through our screening app, you show up, you show us your phone, your results. If they're green, your child can come on in. If they're orange, we're sorry, you're gonna have to turn around and go back home. Students are attending classes remotely. What that means is it's still the remote curriculum that we're going through, but they're in a classroom, they're getting teacher and teaching assistant support to access that material. Students are quickly becoming familiar with the safety practices. By day 2, the kids knew where their rooms were, even if they weren't their traditional rooms. We aren't chasing children around all day saying, put your mask on. In fact, that hasn't been a problem at all, which was again, another very big concern. A lot of people expressed about this. Kids aren't going to want to wear masks. I think because we've all been in this state for 11 months and 3 weeks, folks get it and understand that it works and they're doing it. So that's really been a pleasant surprise. And as I mentioned earlier in the picture, individual student supply boxes, we give them to the students every day. They use what's in them, they get disinfected at the end of the day, they come back. They're not going back and forth to the home, so it limits the spread of germs. Excuse me. Also, we like to remind you of what our 6 critical non-negotiables are anytime we make a decision about coming back in person. They have been our guideposts since last year. They've stayed relevant through the summer, through the fall, and they're even more relevant now. So I'm just going to run through them real quickly as a reminder. Number 1 is always health and safety. You can't teach a child if they're sick, and sick teachers can't teach healthy kids. So we got to make sure everybody's safe and healthy. Number 2, transparency. This town hall, all the other town halls, the constant barrage of emails and newsletters, that's all so you know what we know. You know what we're thinking. And as we've promised before, when we have facts, we'll share the facts. And when we don't know something, we'll let you know that we don't know, but what we're doing to figure it out. And number 3 is highlighted here, meeting the needs of our students. This one is really what the stage we're deeply in right now. As you may recall from the fall, we did a very deep dive into all of our students, analyzed assessment data, attendance data, teacher observation data, so qualitative, quantitative data all put together to really understand which students were really struggling, which ones are struggling a little bit, which ones aren't really struggling that much, and the program's going pretty well for them. We're doing that same kind of deep dive right now, and as a result, we're coming up with prioritization lists for our students on who to bring back. That leads right into number 4. You've probably heard and read as other schools are reopening that early childhood has to come back, has to come back, has to come back. That's the number 1 priority. What we've actually found is early childhood is not an automatic priority. Our early childhood numbers are really positive. Our kids are engaged. Our teachers are rocking it. In fact, they're teaching other teachers how to develop creative and engaging platforms for the little ones. So that just because they're young doesn't automatically make them a priority anymore, at least not here at Creative Minds. Number 5, we started small. We did that very much on purpose, and it was very planful. That was to understand, to focus on the kids who need the most help, the ones who are truly being left behind and falling off the map, but also to get through the policies and procedures, understand what works, what doesn't work, run through the protocols. And I really think that was a very wise choice on our part because we've been able to make adjustments that are going to allow us to expand our programming. And then 6, last but not least by any stretch, data and science are driving our decisions, not political pressure. You may recall early fall, there was a ton of political pressure to get open because it was so economically important. In fact, the mayor created a grant program to sort of quote unquote bribe schools to get kids in. We didn't bow to that pressure because we didn't think the numbers supported bringing kids back yet, that it wasn't safe. We didn't have teachers who were willing to come back. We are trying to meet the needs of our community. That is based on data and science. So knowing our students, that highlighted section I just talked about, we did a lot of data analysis. We did teacher insights too. So not only looking at test scores and some normative and summative assessments, but we really talk to our teachers because they're the ones who interact with your children every day. They see whether or not a child's engaged. They may log on, but they may not answer any questions. They may not participate. That could be a sign that they might need some additional support. We look deeply at students with IEPs, individual education plans, and 504 plans, who already needed additional support to be in school, and some of them need much more support outside of school, whether it's due to the disability or whatever. So we dove very deeply into that and went through IEP by IEP and looked at how our kids were doing. We've also learned that English language learners tend to struggle more with remote learning at home, whether it tends to be a language issue, a language barrier, if the class is taught in English and that may not be their native language and the tech support might not be in their native language, whatever the case may be, we've seen, based on our observations, that English language learners seem to be having a more difficult time with remote learning at home. And then students of essential workers. This is a really critical and important one too, because for a lot of our students who are struggling, we've seen situations where the older sibling might be in charge of taking care of the younger siblings because the family or the caregivers are essential workers. And if they don't work, they don't get paid, or they get fired, or they're in the medical field, or whatever the case may be. They work for the government. They have to be out of the house. And what we found is for some of our larger families in particular, if an older child is trying to help the younger children access the internet, access the online curriculum, they're not able to manage their own education. So we're really looking deep at essential workers. And then, of course, as we mentioned back in the fall, we developed this long list of kids who we wanted to put in our phase 1 of creative care. Not all of them were able to come, not all of them accepted. We're going to go back and invite them again. They're going to get first priority because, again, based on our knowledge and our experience, we've seen they're struggling the most. Defining student needs. So how do we figure that out? As I've mentioned, a lot of these, I'll tick through this pretty quick. And certainly if you have questions about it, drop them in the chat and we'll make sure we answer them. We look at assessment data. That could be a normative assessment, could be a summative assessment, could be our MAP assessments, could be an in-class quiz or homework. All those are forms of assessment. We're, as I mentioned, very closely tracking our IEP progress monitoring. We track it very closely anyway, but I would say we're even going through it more closely at this point with a finer tooth comb to make sure we're getting the right interventions in place. Attendance in remote classes. This has been a really interesting thing for us to look at. We'll have some students that'll come to all their enrichment classes and they haven't been to 40 math classes, right? So clearly there's something going on there. Why are they not doing the math? Why are they doing gym and art and music? So really trying to figure that out and get those students on a regular schedule is going to be critically important. And then there's some who, for whatever reason, whether it's home insecurity or internet access, or again, they're taking care of other family members, their attendance has been very, very low. And we're hoping to by bringing them in, we'll be able to engage them better. Participation, engagement in class discussions, we talked about that already. Our teachers have been an amazing resource around that area. Completion of assignments, looking at Seesaw, seeing who's logging in, who's putting things in there. Learning environment. So this kind of ties in a little bit to sort of how feasible is it for a child to learn at home? Is there a quiet space at home? Or is it a situation where there's a multi-generational family sharing a small apartment, or there's a lot of noise going on? Is the student caring for younger siblings or for elderly family members, whatever the case may be? Really understanding learning environments helps us decide which kids need to come into a school to have, in essence, a more conducive learning environment. Essential workers we talked about. And this one's still, the last one, reliability of internet connection. This is still beguiles the whole city. There's massive equity issues around this, where parts of the city have very unreliable internet, or the apartment buildings only contract with Comcast and Comcast is lousy. There's issues with bill payment. We've handed out dozens and dozens of hotspots, but those get broken, they get lost, whatever the case may be. So looking at that, the actual physical ability to access the internet is another thing that we're looking at. So remember I said we're collecting data. So, and we sent out the choose a schedule form. Well, here's where we stand as of March 8th, 3 p.m. And we've rounded these off, and I apologize, there's loud cars going by, but I'm gonna leave my window open. So school-wide, 458 of our students have, at least their families have submitted a response out of 535. Lower schools at 88, almost 89% response rate. Our middle schools at 77 response rate. Typically, that is a response to a survey that's amazing. We'd be celebrating. But the reality is, it's really important for us to touch and to talk to every single student. So that's why, again, the call to action is do the survey if you haven't done it, or answer your phone because we're going to be calling you or texting you, asking you what your options are. You can kind of see, and this is going to be very high level, you can look at this later, and this really isn't surprising to us, but Option one, to stay remote, to stay where we are now, sort of the safest choice at the moment. A little over a third of our school have opted for that. About a third of our lower school and almost half of our middle school are not comfortable coming back in. A lot of our middle schoolers ride public transportation, so there's a lot less control there. That might explain it. They may have to take multiple buses. We're not sure. But the point is, this matches the kind of rates we're seeing throughout the city. DCPS, for example, has only got about 9,000 out of the 50,000 plus kids they serve in-house right now. And the upper grades are the ones where the response rate is significantly lower. Elementary is significantly higher. Option two, in person only if my child is with their teacher. So you see about a third of our school said, yes, that's what I want. That's the only condition under which I want my child to be back in school. I don't want to do this remote learning or creative cares model. Lower school is a solid 33% there. Upper school is about a quarter of them, or middle school is about a quarter. And then option three, I want my kid in school, even if it's remote learning, the same curriculum we're using now. It's a third, and 25% again. Not surprising numbers, but we're going to get all those numbers up to 100 or to add up to 100 in the next couple days. I'm confident. So based on your choice, we're going to be collecting that data. We're going to be bumping it up against the data of teachers that are willing to come back and able to come back, and figuring out how many slots we can offer, also looking at our COVID restrictions and CDC guidelines. But within that, we have to layer on priorities. Because as we've mentioned, we're focused on equity, and that equity focus means the students that are struggling the absolute most are the ones we need to bring back first. So that's why first priority is going to be creative care students. Again, if they're currently in creative care, they're going to keep that spot. They don't have to start over. Second priority is going to be students who need additional support, who we wanted to be in creative care, but we couldn't accommodate, whether they didn't want to come, we didn't have enough staff, we decided to cap it at 50, whatever. They'll be the second ones in, because we've already figured out they need additional help too. Next step, do we have the building space and teaching staff to accommodate all the students whose families requested a spot? This is sort of the really big one. How many of our staff are willing to come back? Because if we don't have enough teachers, we can't bring in enough students. If the building still is under the same COVID restrictions, it caps the number of people we can have in the building, because you have to be 6 feet apart. You can't have any more than 12 people in any one space at any given time. So that really limits our capacity to educate children. So with those rate limiting factors, and then we may have families, as we saw above, who simply aren't comfortable yet having their children come back in. So we're going to take all that data over the next couple of days and mush it together, bounce it up against each other to figure out how many spots we can offer and how to dole out those spots. If we can offer spots to all students, we're going to switch to a lottery system. So we get to that point where we've gone through our priorities and we've got students who are still interested, but remote learning may have been working for them. We're going to have to do some kind of lottery to see, because we're not tracking when people are making their choice. So it's not first come, first serve in that sense. It is more of it's going to be something like the My School DC lottery system you're already used to. Selection process. Again, we have to focus on logistics. We have a lot of our members of our teaching staff who tell us they're very excited to return, but then there's the ... I want to get vaccinated first. I've lived with my grandmother who's immunocompromised. My child has asthma. I'm high risk, whatever the case may be. So there are very valid exceptions there that we're going to honor people's requests for those exceptions. We're going to honor their evaluation of their risk, because their safety is our top priority. We value their health concerns and their desire to be fully vaccinated before returning, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that happens and to make it as easy as possible. In that same vein, if there are those few or however many who say, I'm just not comfortable coming back yet, we haven't hit herd immunity, we're going to respect that. No one's going to lose their job if they opt to continue teaching remotely. Building space, we talked a little bit about this. That's limited by authorities outside of our control. There is a very hot debate going on about social distancing right now in schools, to be quite frank. It's currently 6 feet apart for all students, desks all facing the same way, et cetera, et cetera. There are some scientists who say 5 feet apart is enough. There's another branch of scientists who say 3 feet is far enough apart, as long as you're masking and doing all the other things, washing hands, hand sanitizing, et cetera. That is being debated, so I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we see those restrictions starting to lighten up. But for right now, as of today, they're all still in place, and they haven't said when they're going to revisit them, but I do know the debates are happening. We've been part of them. So what that means is our maximum class size is 10 students to a classroom with 2 adult teachers in that classroom. An additional member may pop in once in a while to do push-in services, but they can't stay for a long time. All this is to maintain tracking and tracing capacity, keep our cohorts small, minimize exposure, minimize the sharing of germs. So this is kind of a caveat that I want to put out here so you understand where we are. Expanded at-home learning. If you choose all remote at-home schedule for your child now, that's going to be the schedule for the rest of the school year. So those 77 of you who haven't done the schedule yet, if you opt for virtual, that's fine. We will continue our virtual programming, of course, and continue to make it better. But we're not going to be able to let you come in later if you didn't choose for it. Students will, on an at-home schedule or an at-school schedule, however, will be allowed to return to remote learning at home at any time. Let's say there's an outbreak and people get nervous, or folks just change their mind. You can always go back to virtual, not a problem. Expanded at school learning. So this is what we're calling phase 2. This is when we're going to move beyond the first group of kids we brought in, when we expect several of our teachers to be fully vaccinated. And we'll be able to have developed our slots, our seats, and reached out to the families, and families give us their decision so we can start slotting kids into seats. So that's currently targeted for March 29th, that Monday. We do, however, expect, again, those of you who may have chosen an at-school option, but we don't have room for you right away, as more teachers get their vaccinations, because it's going very wide now, we expect more teachers to come to campus, which means we can have more students on campus. So that's kind of a rolling admission process there, I think we're going to see. So however many we have on March 9th, I do expect we'll have significantly more by the end of the school year. I'm going to turn it over to Nyamka so I can have a drink of water, and she can talk through sort of what at-school learning looks like, what our thinking is around it, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. So just want to tell you a little bit about what the expanded at-school learning looks like. We want to have students, so students in preschool through 4th grade will be at school from 9 until 2:30, and then students in 5th grade through 8th grade would be there. Same start time, but we'll extend it a little bit later to 2:45 to also allow for time to dismiss in a safe way.
Next slide.
Yeah. All right. So wanted to highlight some similarities and differences between the at-school learning as well as at-home learning. And so the content will be the same for all students, no matter where they are. So students at home will be learning the same thing as the students in the school building. A couple of differences that will exist will be students who are in the building will be having recess with their peers. And just want to highlight that we are only opening the playground to the students who are learning at school. The main reason is we want to know who's on that playground. If any sort of cases or germs arise, we'll know who was on the playground, and we'll be able to account for that with our scheduling. And also students who are in person will also be having morning meeting with their cohort of students that they're in. We really want to create that community because the classrooms right now are not students and all in the same grade level. So we want to provide space and opportunity for them to get to know those students who are currently in there and kind of build community that way. Next slide, please. And so thinking about the teaching staff who are at school, just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what this looks like. So the plan is for students to learn and continue to learn with their grade level teachers. We have been really proud of the program that we've put in place and really want to maintain the integrity of that as much as possible. We don't want to create drastic changes to the schedule, drastic changes to who the students are going to be learning with. As we put the program together, we were really thoughtful around What does that look like? We want the students in that grade level to get to know all of the teachers at that grade level. And that has helped us so that they can continue to provide that content that they have mastered over the year and really deliver that instruction to students in a way that is very meaningful and continues to help students learn and grow. What we've also found is that as we put together these cohorts, we need to have multiple teachers who oversee kind of a cohort. The reason is that we want the teachers who to continue to deliver that instruction that they do virtually, but we realize that we have to kind of they have to be in the classroom part of that time and then out of the classroom. For example, if there's 3 teachers or 4 teachers assigned to one class, one of the teachers may have to go out and do morning meeting with the virtual group. So they may leave that classroom and go to a separate classroom where they're alone and do that virtual lesson, but there's still enough teachers in the classroom coverings to ensure that those students who are in that CARES classroom are receiving the support that they need. So just want to highlight that as we kind of move into the rest of the discussion, because I want to be mindful that, you know, when we say we have staff covering classrooms, that we can't just say we typically have 2 teachers covering this many students. There's going to be teachers who are going to be continuing to deliver their instruction remotely because we want to maintain the integrity of that program. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks, Namka. I get to do this one. So between now and March 11th, this Thursday, excuse me, we're going to be diving into all that data we're collecting right now. Again, fill out the survey if you haven't done it. I'm going to be a broken record, but I want to hear from every single child. We're going to review the data from the Choose a Schedule form to understand what people's choices are and sort of what the what our sort of population, our universe is. We're going to be constantly asking about staff vaccination and looking at our desire to return data. We have had town meetings with all of our staff, mandatory town meetings where we've talked about all the safety protocols in place, about what the vaccinations mean and how to get them. And early on, before it was opened wide to all teachers, when it was only ones who were in schools right now, we were putting folks on the list and lobbying to have it open to all teachers. So we're really happy it's all teachers. So we're trying to track that and understand who's even able to come back in. And then we're really going to look hard at the data about our students' needs and engage our teachers in thinking through what's the best cohort structure for us to build. After this big comprehensive review, we're going to do what's safe and logically feasible. So if we know it's safe to follow the protocols, we're going to follow the protocols. And if we can only have X number of kids because of the protocols, then we're only going to have X number of kids. So what that means for you, we are going to contact all the families that requested an at-school spot. That's options 2 and 3. We're going to tell them whether or not we're able to offer you a spot and then tell you when you need to respond, because if you don't want your spot, there may be someone else who wants your spot. Modes of learning, we'll tell families whether or not we're offering in-person classes or we're continuing the remote classes while at school. So that's going to be, and this is another thing we're deciding right now is, does the at-school programming, is it going to look different at all, or is it going to be just like Nyapka just described for more students? We're looking at that right now. We're inclined to go towards the latter at the moment for logistical reasons and stability reasons. But that's something we're also going to be talking about, and we'll let you know. You'll have the option to accept or decline the offer. And as I mentioned, there will be a deadline for that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the health and safety protocols that are going on here at the school. So you can, a lot of this is about building confidence in people coming back, but also understanding what the risks are and what risks still exist. So our comprehensive protocols are based on that 110 plus page plan I mentioned earlier, which has been vetted by the Office of the State Superintendent and the Public Charter School Board, sent a consultant here to review our protocols and sign off and give us recommendations. So it's been vetted pretty deeply. We feel pretty confident it's good. In that, masks are required, as it is in the city. Anybody the age of 2 and up is supposed to be wearing a mask. So all students and all staff, when they're in a class, unless they're in their own office and the door is closed, they have to wear a mask. Anytime you're around people, you have to wear a mask, and we have to hold each other accountable. A daily health screening is going to be required. I mentioned the CMI screening app. No one's coming in unless you pass that screening. Again, that's mandatory. You can review the questions in our guide to at school learning. We have very strong protocols in place for addressing possible cases, or if a child displays symptoms while they're at school, maybe they came to school, didn't have symptoms, but they develop a fever while they're here. We've got very clear protocols in place, again, from the Department of Health and the CDC. So we know how to isolate the kid. We know how to do the rapid test and who to contact. Social distancing, again, those guidelines may change, but right now it's 6 feet apart. Those will continue to be enforced. Really big thing here that I want everybody to understand. We have an on-site testing program. My CDC just announced theirs too, that they're going to do random samples. We're a little different because anybody who's in the building, students, staff, or anybody in their household, so that can be family of a staff member or family of a student who's at school learning, can get free testing here. We're partnered with the Elaine Ellis Center for Health. They're amazing. They are the most efficient and nicest people I think I've ever met. They're a local Ward 7 health clinic that brings all their equipment here. They run through the testing in under an hour on Wednesdays, and that's just been great. And to date, everybody who's gone through our surveillance testing program, we haven't had a positive test. So our protocols are working. That sentinel surveillance routine monitoring, the other reason we do it is we can monitor our own health in that sense. And so we know what's going on in our own space. So that's another reason why it's really important for us to do it. You can only do the surveillance testing if you're currently not experiencing COVID-like symptoms. Again, you won't be allowed in the building if you are. So you can't do the tests which are on site. This test is the most reliable. It's a nasal swab versus the rapid test. So it has a much higher level of reliability. We get our results usually within 48 hours. They'll email them straight to you, and they tell the school, again, for our tracing and tracking. So if you're in the building, you test positive, we know everybody else who was in the building at the same time you may have come in contact with. So all you need to do, if you want to do this, is register with Heather Hessling. And we'll go from there, and she'll hook you up, and it's a great program. So quick closing thoughts, because I really want to spend most of our time tonight answering your questions, hearing your feedback. You probably think of things we haven't thought of. Participating in a dialogue and making sure we build your confidence the same way we're building our staff's confidence that we're doing this as safely as possible. So our closing thoughts are, man, do we miss the kids. That joyful noise, that having kids in here, getting my 250 plus high fives. I can't wait till I can get a high five again at drop off, but we miss them. We want them back. That is our main driving force here. We're trying to figure out how to get as many back in a safe way as possible. But we're always going to be safe, and we're going to be safe for all community members. We recognize that this past year has been brutally hard. I can't think of anybody I know, and I challenge any of you to do that here on this call, to find someone who has not been impacted one way or another by the pandemic, whether it's having to school your children at home, or you can't go to your own work, you can't go out to restaurants, or more tragically, someone's gotten ill and passed away. There's a lot of trauma around this, and one of the reasons we're doing this carefully is to make sure we also focus on that socio-emotional learning to help kids deal with this, but also to celebrate the resilience they've shown. Our reopening decisions will always reflect the values we hold at Creative Minds. That's not going to change. It's not going to be political. You're not going to be able to offer grants to us to make us do it. We're going to do it when it's right to do it, or at least when our community feels safe enough to do it. And we are super excited for the day that we're all back together. Again, I am very optimistic that will be next fall when we can all be back in the building together, and that is what we're driving for. So I'm going to stop sharing screen, turn it over to Craig, mute myself, and he will direct the questions to the appropriate authorities. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chuck. We do have a couple questions, so if you have something on your mind, please do drop it in the chat, addressing it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. Nyamka, we'll kind of start with you. There are a few questions around coming back and, of course, the model. So maybe if you can start with the number of, someone asked the number of teachers we're expecting to come back, and if we're leaning to one model versus the other, and what that dependency is based on the number of staff.
Sure. So we're still collecting data on the number of staff who we will have in the building, or actually the number of teachers. I want to highlight that because it is different. We're just having our teaching staff supporting those CARES classrooms. And when we think about teachers, those are our general education teachers, those are our inclusion teachers, our teaching assistants, and dedicated aides. In those numbers, like I said, we're still gathering those numbers, but we want to, as we think about that, as I mentioned previously, we really want to maintain the integrity of the distance learning program. So we want to, what our thinking around is developing these cohorts is that they're a set number of teachers assigned to that cohort. Those teachers will be coming in and out of those classrooms, but working just with those cohort of students, because we really want to mitigate any sort of having teachers intersect or work with students in multiple cohorts. So those teachers will just be assigned to that cohort. Again, really trying to mitigate any spread of germs there. So when we think about numbers, so if I say there were 10, and when we were in person, we would typically have 2 teachers with this number of students. However, in this CARES program, what we found to be successful in maintaining teachers keeping their schedules as much as possible is we need to have multiple teachers supporting those cohorts. So like I said, we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means. If there's multiple lead teachers who are willing to come back versus dedicated aides versus teaching assistant, all those numbers are going to be contingent upon what it looks like, how many students we're going to be able to bring back. How the learning models are going to differ. And if I'm understanding the question correctly, is what is it going to look like for students who are in the building versus those who are virtual? What that's going to look like, they're going to still be receiving that content level instruction from the teacher who they've been receiving that instruction from since the beginning of this school year. What may look a little bit different, and like I said, we want to create as few changes to the schedule as possible. What that may mean, however, is a student who, for their small group, and they're working with teacher X, teacher Y might need to support that small group instruction, that small group, or the office hour or something like that. But we want to keep that main groupings that they have as consistent with the teacher as possible.
Yep, thanks, Nyamka. One question, maybe Chuck, or if you both want to tag team, when are we going to make the decision on which model we're going to select, and when will folks be notified?
That's when we call everybody who's picked an at-person spot. We will let you know what the model is going to look like. We are in the process of analyzing what's working with the current model, what any other different kinds of model might look at. But again, all those contingencies Nyamka just ticked off for us are critically important. For example, and this is a random example, I'm not saying this is true, but say our ELA teachers in middle school have family health issues where they can't come in. That might make it really hard to have an ELA class on site, right? Or have it with their teachers. So we're trying to balance all of those things and be respectful of everybody's concerns. But I believe we will get to that point by the end of this week, because that's what we said we're going to do.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heather, our Director of Operations and Compliance, who's done a magnificent job, as Chuck kind of talked to you about the testing program that we have in place and what type of testing we may offer or have available.
Great, thank you, everybody. We actually have 2 different types of testing set up for students. Hold on just a second. Sorry, I had to ask my family member to go to a different room. We have 2 types of testing set up. One of them is our Sentinel surveillance program, which has been set up since December. It actually offers free PCR COVID testing every other Wednesday to anyone who's interested that wants to sign up. It's very simple. Again, as Chuck mentioned, this is our asymptomatic testing. The other testing program we have set up with DC Health is a symptomatic testing. So for example, if a student is at school and becomes symptomatic and displays 2 or more COVID symptoms, our school nurse, Nurse Owens, if the parent is consented, will do a COVID test on site. They'll do the 15-minute rapid test. And then if that test comes back negative, they'll do the standard PCR test.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I just sent a chat out. We have 2 more questions remaining kind of in the queue. So if you do have additional questions or follow-up, now is the time to get them in. We're at 7:18, scheduled to go to 7:30, but we'll certainly go as long as we need to answer your questions if there are more. I'm going to pass it back to Chuck to tackle 2 questions looking forward. What are we expecting for the start of school next year? When are we expecting that will happen, or any changes are planned? And then what we may plan for summer engagement offerings, whether that be in person or virtual. So 2 parts on the start of the year and summer activities.
Great. So a lot of the work we've been doing throughout this is trying to have a consistent schedule, because that's good for kids and it's good for families when they make plans, and it's really good for teachers to have a spring break and have that time off to recharge their batteries and all that. So next year's calendar is going to look a lot like any other school year's calendar. We're looking at the end of August start date, so before Labor Day, that last Monday, I think in August, or it's the 30th perhaps. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but yeah, I got nodding heads, so okay. Teachers will come back before that for professional development, and if protocols, COVID protocols are still in place, we'll train them on those. But that will all happen sort of regular schedule, and we're going to still have the holiday breaks that we usually have, the spring break that we usually have. So that's what we're currently thinking. We do have to legally hit 180 days. The schedule we design always gives us a little room to make sure we hit that 180 days. So we'll have to do that again. So it should start normal next year. Summer, we are in the process of figuring out our summer programming. Some of you may know, normally in summer, we run something called extended school year. That's for students who have IEPs who have not made adequate progress towards their goals during the year. And so we invite them to get some additional support over 4 weeks in the summer. It's typically a half-day type program where they're working with their related service provider or getting tutoring or support for whatever their IEP goals may be. So what we're thinking is we'll have an ESY program, because that's a really effective way to help those kids catch up and be on close to the same level as their peers. So that'll happen in the summer. But then we are exploring other ways to get folks back on campus, because I would hate to have kids out for an entire year, those families that have opted to stay virtual through the end of the year, and then suddenly they have to pop back into school at day 1, August 30th, and not have any opportunity to sort of reacclimate, to socialize and all that. Also, we're thinking about learning loss and socio-emotional learning, or that trauma I was talking about earlier in the deck. What are ways we can help kids sort of work on those social skills again? Yeah, there may be some academic tutoring happening, but are there ways that we can play games together? We can work on conflict resolution. We can remind people about conscious discipline and what that means and how that's an important part of our culture. So we're currently looking at all those kind of things. We're having, it's not solid enough to tell you who the partners are we're talking to, but I think we can offer some interesting programs this summer, assuming the pandemic allows us to, and some of these partnerships work out. So we will keep you posted, but we're already planning that summer session stuff right now.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Now a question that I'm going to ask to both of you, you and Heather, to tackle, kind of you perhaps around expectations. And the question is, what we'll do after spring break and for folks that may be traveling soon. So maybe if you want to chat a little bit about the expectations we have of folks, and then Heather can address the compliance and policy standpoint.
Yeah, so Heather is the true expert on what the regulations require. Today or yesterday, I forget which it is, and Heather can correct me, the CDC just said if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine as much if you go to some states. I don't know the exact rules because Heather tells me what they are. But as I said, those things are changing. We have expectations that our staff do what's safe. We have a code of conduct that if they're going to be in the building, they sign this code of conduct. And that basically says you're going to follow all the safety requirements and regulations to help keep your community safe. It's, it's sort of an honor code, but it's a way to reinforce that message with our staff. And certainly in the fall, we expect everybody to be back in person, unless there's a clear legal or medical exception in place. Heather, do you want to talk a little bit about the current state of the rules?
Sure. I will talk a little bit about it. DC Health and OSSI has a very clear rubric of what to do in different scenarios. If you travel out of DC and you don't have a waiver, you're supposed to self-isolate for 14 days, or you're supposed to self-isolate for 3 to 5 days, get a COVID test, and if you get a COVID PCR test and it's negative, you can come back in the building. Now, there are currently 3 options to the waiver. Option 1, you are exempt from the mandatory quarantine if you travel to Virginia or Maryland. Option 2, if you have tested positive for COVID-19 in the last 90 days and you are not experiencing any COVID-like symptoms, then you can come back in the building without quarantining for the 14 days. Option 3, if you are fully vaccinated, and the definition of fully vaccinated means that you received the last dose of whatever regiment you have, plus 14 days. So if you received either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, that means 14 days after your second shot. If you received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that means 14 days after the one and only shot. And if you receive the vaccine within 90 days, then you do not have to self-isolate and you can come back to school immediately, assuming you are not experiencing any COVID-like symptoms. If you don't meet one of those 3 waivers, you are expected to follow the DC health guidelines, which are to self-isolate for 14 days, or after returning from travel to 3 to 5 days, get a COVID test. And if it's negative, then you're more than welcome to come back.
Great, thanks, Heather. It's not a town hall till we hear from Abby. So Abby, I will kick it over to you with the question that Noelle asked. I'll briefly read it for folks. Around the model said that lead teachers would continue virtually teaching the morning meeting and classes, and support would support the in-person classroom. But for lower level school, the lead and support teachers have each already been teaching different classes. Does this mean our lead teacher may start teaching all the classes?
Sure. So we are really trying to prioritize stability in the virtual program as we transition some students back to school. We are trying to place a teaching assistant as the lead of the in-person classes, which would disrupt the virtual program significantly less. So some of the tutoring or office hours might shift, but really that should be all. We should not see many, if any, honestly, switches with small group schedules or anything with the lead literacy, math, and IPC teachers.
Great, thanks, Abby. Our last question that's currently in the chat, so I will officially say last call here for questions, but Heather did answer at the chat, but I'll ask her to also verbally answer in case some folks are just listening in versus in front of their computer, around are the guidelines the same for students, and also are the guidelines the same for all persons in the building?
The answer is yes. The guidelines are the same for all persons that come in the building. It doesn't matter if you're a student or a staff.
All right, thanks very much. We did have one more pop up in the Q&A, which I'll read. If you do have any additional questions, please do put them in the chat to all panelists and everyone so that we can see. But Jennifer asks, if students travel for spring break are in an in-person cohort, can they attend remotely until they have met one of the DC requirements? So that's probably a question, Nyamka, partially for you. Heather can specify what the requirement is, and then Nyamka can address how we'll handle that.
Sure, I'm just looking up for the question one more time.
Jennifer, if you can also paste it into the chat, that would be great. I'm unable to copy and paste, or else I would do that for you.
I can do it right now. So the question was, if a student travels for spring break, are they the same and in person, can they attend remotely until they have met one of the DC requirements? What we would hope, and we don't want to kind of have this one size fits all for, you know, this happens in this, but we want the students who are in person to be able to have that opportunity because they weren't being successful remotely. So that's one of the big reasons why we brought them in. So as much as possible, we would like for those students who have accepted that in-person spot to be able to be in school for that, because that means someone else is not able to have that spot, because we can't, you know, have kids going back and forth if they didn't have a spot.
Great, thanks, Nyamka. One just popped up, so perhaps you can address the communication that we send on 312 and 315, or Jen, If we want to hear from our marketing guru, Jen, as well, what method we plan to let folks know of about the results of the questionnaire that they filled out, and if folks have a spot on the 12th and the 15th.
So with the notifying the families, what we will do is we will do first an email and then a follow-up, because we want to make sure that we have been in contact with you. So if we don't hear back from you for email, then we will do the follow-up call. Right now we have, I think it's over 100 or 200 families or something. So our first attempt will be by email to see if we can get some responses back that way. And then we will do follow-up calls.
Great. All right. Well, we don't have any other questions right now. Hopefully we've answered everyone's question that they posted in the chat sufficiently. You can always follow up. This will also be posted, so you can reach out with questions after this. So we are just shy of 7:30, so I will hand it back to Chuck to kind of wrap us up.
Great, thank you. So thank you all again so very much for coming out tonight, asking really thoughtful questions, for trusting us with your children. I'm really, really excited about where we're headed with this, and that we're going to be able to bring more kids back soon and continue to build on that safely and successfully in a way that minimizes disruption, and builds sort of that stability that kids need when they're little. So thank you all. Thank you to my staff too. I want to take a moment here to call out all the educators who have done an amazing job under really difficult circumstances to develop a powerful virtual program, but also to make sure we hear the needs of the students if it's not working for them, and for the ops team to have figured out all of these rules and regulations and to put things in place that allow us to come back to work safely and bring kids back to work safe. It's really a community effort, and I've just been so impressed by this community. So thank you all. Thank you, team. Thank you, families. Everybody enjoy the nice weather we're gonna have for the rest of the week. If you have questions, feel free to send us an email or call. If you think of something after this is over. Until then, good night, everybody. Thank you.